So that's all part of Revelation's How to Live in a Dangerous World. Revelation 1:5 that we began with, and if you want to turn back there, tells us about how this translated into their lives. These people were living in the midst of a Roman Empire that was living in dissolution, with a public homosexual Roman emperor with a castrated male slave wife by the name of Florus. That was Nero's wife, was a male slave that he used. And it says in verse 5 of Revelation 1, these people living in that wicked era believed in Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, the ruler over the kings of the earth, him who loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood. In your version, by the way, that's one of the variants. There are variants in the Bible where some manuscripts spell things one way and some spell them another. And if you want to know about all the variants in the New Testament, there are 250 pages of Greek text in the New Testament, one half of one of the 250 pages of variants. If you've heard of all these variants, these differences in the manuscripts, the totality of differences is a half of one of 250 pages. And this happens to be in verse 5. There's one of them. There's the letter S, luso. Him who loved us and washed is luso. Or luo, who loved us and released us, some of your versions might say, or loosed us, or something like that. So either it's he washed us or he loosed us, but how they took it is, the instant of salvation, we have this new beginning. Every day, a new beginning, a new hope, a new peace, a new joy, a new powerful purpose to live. And those people, whether they were getting up in the slave quarters or whether they were getting up in that Roman camp on the border, facing the pagans and the wild people at the border, fighting them all the time, they had a new beginning. A new beginning of knowing I'm forgiven. A new beginning of knowing that Jesus Christ loves me and has a purpose for me, and that I'm going to live for him and redeem this day. So, what is the book of Revelation about? Well, Jesus actually gave his longest message that he preached about the future in Matthew 24. It's also in Mark 13. It's also in Luke 21. He gave it just before his crucifixion, sitting on the side of the Mount of Olives. It's called the Olivet Discourse. Theologians call it that, Bible students. So Jesus is sitting there looking at Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives and says, hey, by the way, I'm coming back to the Mount of Olives, but before I come back, you're going to see stuff going on here in this city of Jerusalem. The disciples were fascinated, and they were just brimming with questions. When is this going to happen? How's it going to happen? Are we going to be big shots then too? They were really with it. No, they weren't. They were always thinking of themselves. But in Matthew 24, Jesus gives these specific details of how the world's going to end, but he just kind of summarized it. And you know what? He came back in Revelation to the Isle of Patmos and gave the expanded version. You know how you can buy, Lord of the Rings in the little one, or the expanded, the uncut, the long version, that takes 20 hours to watch. That's what Revelation 6-19 is. It's the uncut, long version of the end of the world. If prophecy isn't important, why does Jesus spend so much of his ministry talking about it, alluding to it, preaching about it? And he actually makes a journey back and spends 3 chapters talking about how Christians are supposed to live in the world. And then he spends all the rest of this massive 22-chapter book talking about the end of the world. Why is it that so many people think, that's not important, when it was important to Christ? Well, Jesus gives specific details on the end of the world. Some of what he said is this, verse 8. Matthew 24. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. What Jesus said is, I'm going to tell you about a lot of stuff you're very aware of, but what you're going to see is, verse 33, when you see these things, know it's near, but notice what it says, when you see all these things. See, basically, Matthew 24 has a listing off of common things: famines, pestilences, earthquakes, wars, ethnic strife. Actually, it says ethnos fighting ethnos. Now, the buzzword in America is racist. I mean, everything is racist. If you don't agree with someone, you are racist. But underlying that is ethnic strife between different people groups. I mean, it's always what precipitates these wars. I mean, you know what the biggest one right now is? Between the Shia and the Sunni. I mean, if the Muslims were united, we'd really have a problem today. But we have this nice polarization and tension going on between them. And every time, they get totally united, fighting together, then they fragment again and they fight with each other. And what's interesting is that's underlying the world. This, as Jesus said, ethne will be fighting ethne. Ethnic group will be fighting ethnic group. But in the end, it's going to intensify. And that's what Revelation expands on. Then verse 34, Jesus said, assuredly I say unto you, this generation, what generation? The generation, verse 33, that sees everything. All the cylinders. Remember I told you, over the years I've told you the story of when the Arab oil embargo in 73 made gas, scarce. I had a big Caprice. It was like the size of a tractor. It was so big. Chevy Caprice, had a full-size couch in the back seat. It was gigantic. I wanted one of those 4-cylinder Japanese cars, so I just lifted the hood, being very mechanical, and I pulled 4 of the spark plug wires off. I immediately had a 4-cylinder car. I did. Only 4 cylinders fired, but the other ones tried. The entire motor almost broke off the motor mounts because it was convulsing because it was out of the firing sequence and everything else. So I'm not really very mechanical, and, I about ruined my car. But when all the cylinders are firing, Jesus said, the generation that sees that will by no means pass away till everything is finished. That's what Revelation says. When these things happen, they're going to happen at warp speed. Okay?